Chris Phillips. He's a former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office and joins us once again. Chris, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We spoke to you, of course, on Thursday while, we've seen the immediate aftermath of this terror attack. Can you tell us there's an awful lot of information that's come out about the killer, Jihad al-Shami. I mean, least of all, his name, which is a bit of a concern. Tell us everything we now know about this man.
Yeah, well, this man does not appear to have been on the terror watch list, which on its own is a bigger concern than anything, actually. It just goes to show how many people we've got to be concerned about in the UK, that he wasn't considered one of the terrorist watch list. But certainly he was a man who lived very close to the location of his attack. And also concerning is that he was arrested quite recently for rape and is currently on bail.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. That's a good result for mankind, I think. The simple fact is that this is a man who clearly harbored a lot of hysterical worry about the West, and decided to go out and do something very similar, actually, to the attacker on Westminster Bridge back in 2017, where he didn't show up on the government's watch list, but actually was very, very dangerous.
Often don't. I mean, all we have people who do, they've been on the list, and they're basically, the security sources have said, look, we've got a load of other people who are even more of a risk, so we're not going to be too bothered about this. But I mean, Syrian-born, came with his parents at a young age, British nationality, but he followed a hate preacher who'd called Jews animals. He out on bail for rape. He'd also made direct threats by email identifying himself to his local MP over his support for Israel. And he was reported to the police. The MP got more security. But the police never even interviewed him. So someone identifies themselves, lives nearby, makes a direct death threat to the police about to an MP, and the police don't even think it's worth interviewing them. But my God, if I wrote a tweet misgendering somebody, the police would turn up at my door, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's really unfortunate.
Unfortunate.
Well, it's worse than that. But the point is, I don't know how much information was relayed to the police and how much.
The MP reported it to the police because he had his security stepped up.
We just don't know exactly what's gone through, and that will come out in the clearness of time, I think.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. We've got to take these people seriously. We've got to take people that issue threats very seriously. And of course, none of us want to police the social media and stuff, but people like this do need to be stopped.
Yeah, and also, again, he was like a cannabis-smoking university dropout. He was controlling and coercive in relationship. Again, police wouldn't know those bits. But, I mean, he literally ticks every box for someone who was likely to possibly be a risk, and his behaviour suggests he was a risk. Now, we've got a lot more detail also about the actual attack itself that's emerged over the weekend. And initially, obviously, we had two people, when I was on air on Thursday, two people who had died, and we had three people who were injured. And then it later emerged that one of the people who died had been stabbed by Jihad al-Shami, and the other was behind the door of the synagogue, desperately among the men trying to hold it closed heroically, who then appears to have been shot by the police when they fired at the terrorist. An absolute tragedy, and another person in hospital also has gunshot wound. Now, the Greater Manchester Police referred themselves, for investigation. But I mean, look, you've carried a weapon. You understand these things. I mean, my heart goes out to those who've died or been injured. My heart goes out to the families of those heroic men who fought off this attacker. But also, my heart goes out to the police officer who fired those shots.
Yeah, exactly. And listen, I've seen the photo of the terrorist standing in front of the doors, and it was pointed out to me. You don't even necessarily see. You imagine the focus. You're focusing on that terrorist with the knife. Yeah. You don't see the men's faces in the windows. No. And
but also, you've already got a security guard in a pool of blood on the floor beside you.
Yeah, and they had to deal with it very quickly. They've got split seconds to react. They fired their gun, and clearly, at least two of the bullets didn't hit their target. They went past. And this is one of the dangers of firearms that is untold, really, is that you see, in the movies, you see all these people firing guns, but you don't see the bullets landing. And
but is it right that
it's got to hit something?
Yeah, well, also there's some thought that it may have gone through the first bullet, not killing al-Shami, but it may have gone through him and hit somebody else. But I understand that the counter-terror police are now using sort of some more high-velocity bullets that are more likely to kill a terrorist, but they also pose an extra risk to passers-by and to innocents. So, you know, there's a trade-off, isn't there? I mean, that's the thing. If he had managed to push open that door, and if those men weren't behind that door, he would have been able to do that. He could have killed far more, and the police could have killed more in a shootout, in the synagogue. So the awful truth is they did the right thing.
You're right. Interestingly, we always used to use bullets that would stop in the person. But of course, if you're wearing a bulletproof vest, or as he was wearing something that looked like he was going to explode, they have to kill him immediately, and they need a bullet that's going to take him out. But the payoff for that is if that bullet goes through him or goes through a door, there are going to be people behind that door. And the amazing thing really is that there's been no outcry from the Jewish community about these poor people that were shot by police officers. They knew the situation. That's not something we have with other communities when accidental shots are discharged.
No, indeed. And where are you when it comes to these marches being there's this move to give police the powers to curb these marches, or particularly repeat marches? We know under the Public Order Act the police already do have power. We know that in a 7-year period they actually banned 13 marches, 10 of which I think were English Defence League, so-called far right marches. So we know they've got the power to do that if they believe there is going to be violence. Now, we've got these pro-Palestinian marches, we're told, but given the scale of arrests we're seeing, given the outrageous anti-Semitism, given the intimidation that people feel, I mean, is it now time to say this isn't about freedom of speech anymore? This is about deliberately intimidating a minority community in this country, and it needs to stop.
Yeah, well, we do need to prevent ridiculous marches going on time and time again. Unfortunately, in this country, we have got to rent a crowd. We've known it for years. Some people will turn up to any crowd in order to cause problems. And we see that time and time again. And what we have now is a group of people that they've got lots of time on their hands that want to take up police time and our time, and are within this committing offences and getting arrested. So we need to do something about it. We cannot allow this type of criminality on our streets.
What do you make of there's almost like a competition at the moment between, the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister and then the Conservatives and Reform in terms of what we'll do in terms of deporting people who are illegally, or deporting people who, and Kemi Badenoch was saying at the start of the Tory Party conference, deporting people who display blatant anti-Semitism and the like. Do we, is that where we need to go?
There are far too many people, and this man was an unknown. I know what you said about the threatening of the MP, but he wasn't on the terrorist watch list. How many more people do we have of his ilk in this country? We just
thousands, tens of thousands. We know that. We know we've got tens of thousands of these people.
We've got to do something about this. And what amazes me, as a right-leaning person, is that the Conservatives didn't deal with this 10, 15 years ago when it was brewing up. And all the politicians have been scared out of their life to deal with a problem that everyone in the country can see formulating.
Absolutely.
And we will have more of these types of incidents.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
until something is done about it.
Absolutely. As chief political writer at Spiked Online. And Brendan, I mean, every now and then I think we do find we disagree on some things, and I'm quite relieved to find that we have some differing opinions, but you have been an absolute trailblazer on this issue, calling an awful lot of the issues out in terms of the security of this country, and particularly the Islamist threat, far before most commentators have done. All credit to you on that, but it's not very nice being proved right, is it?
No, not at all. And, when I hear people saying the real problem in this country is the far right, or the real problem is middle-aged white men, that's what we hear from Gary Neville and people like that. I just want to give them a clap around the ear, because the fact of the matter is, of course, there's a problem with the far right. Of course, there's a problem with other forms of extremism, but radical Islam is the biggest threat that this country faces. I think 100 people now in the past 20 years have been killed in radical Islamist violent attacks. That's a really large number of people. That includes children as well, of course. We've got to take it more seriously, but we live under a political establishment that not only doesn't want to talk about radical Islam, it won't even say the I word. It never even as Islamist. You know, they won't call.
It's got nothing. No. It's got nothing to do with Islam. They'll say. I mean, they genuinely. It's not. I mean, it is a radical political ideology that has grown in recent decades, and there are, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of Muslims who live completely, you know, peaceful, normal lives, are no threat to anybody. But pretend that there isn't this radicalised, dangerous political ideological Islam, and that it's not massively influential across the Middle East and Africa is madness. I mean, it's head in sand stuff.
Complete madness and complete moral cowardice, just a real institutionalized cowardice where they can't even name the problem that we face, far less come up with solutions for tackling it. I remember after the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017, no one would say the word Islamist, never mind Islam, no one would say Islamist, and it was obviously an Islamist attack. I remember Andy Burnham back then said there's no room in our city for extremists, and
there is.
And Morrissey at the time said, an extremist what? Was it an extremist cat? You know, what are we talking about here?
And he wrote a song also about how, you know, I'm absolutely nonsense, and the idiots say, or something, you know, don't look back in anger. You know, I'm absolutely going to look back in anger. I remember saying that on air on this very station that very day. I will absolutely be angry about it. It is extraordinary, isn't it? Look, we've found out more and more and more about this killer. Thankfully dead himself. Hooray! Let's celebrate. You should sometimes celebrate some people being dead. It's a good thing. Jihad al-Shami will no longer be able to be a threat to people. Syrian-born himself, brought to this country, was very young, came with his parents, became a British citizen. He had followed a hate preacher who called Jews animals. He had been massively radicalised online. He'd been very open to many people about his radicalisation. He had made death threats to the local MP. It was reported to the police. Police didn't even bother interviewing him. He was out on bail for an alleged rape. I mean, the clues were there, and yet not on a watch list, not interviewed by the police. I mean, even the fact that his father, who had come here and been, you know, presumably had British nationality and still here, Faraj al-Shami, working in the NHS, he had publicly, openly on his social media praised the October 7th attackers as heroic. I mean, it's not like people are even plotting secretly, quietly in their bedrooms. They're open and blatant about it, whether it's on social media, whether it's on the streets at these marches. And we're told that we're a tolerant society, but we shouldn't be tolerant of intolerance, should we?
We certainly should not be tolerant of any Islamist plotting or anti-Semitism or any form of hatred that can lead to violence. And that's exactly what we had in this story that we've seen in over the past few days. You know, some people are still saying we can't be sure what his motive was. I mean, his name is Jihad, and he went to a synagogue to commit an extraordinary act of violence. I think we can be pretty clear. On
the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. I mean, there were clues, Brendan. There were clues.
There were clues. This was an act of radical Islamist anti-Semitic terrorism. But you know, Julia, you make a really important point, which is that a lot of this stuff is happening out in the open. It's right out there. And the reason that can happen is because there has been the slow burn of anti-Semitism in this country for the past 2 years. We've seen synagogues being graffitied. We've seen a Jewish girl had a bottle thrown at her in Stamford Hill. Jewish kids at the Jewish Free School in London were told to take off their blazers on the way to and from school so no one would know they were Jews. There's been a spike in anti-Semitic attacks. It's gone on, and some of us, including you, begged officialdom to take this more seriously, begged the opinion forming classes to talk about it more, and too many of them turned a blind eye. And then the end result is this horrific act we saw in Manchester. And
that's the thing, that is the end result. It was always going to happen. I wrote a piece to The Sun. I know I've read some pieces you've written as well. You know, I don't know why Prime Minister was saying he was shocked. You know, I wasn't shocked. Everyone knew it was a question of when and not if. But this is the thing. When you've got people like even, you know, cabinet ministers, you know, like David Lammy talking about genocide in Israel, when you've got the lies that are on the BBC, Sky and ITV, but I hold BBC particularly to account because we have to pay their wages and because they are such a trusted international broadcaster that when they say things, it comes with more weight and gives succor to everyone else. When they push let's face it, the Palestinian agenda over and above the facts and report the war in Gaza as if it's some uniquely horrific experience, when they know it's not. it's war, and in fact that the ratio of civilian deaths to combatant deaths is actually one of the lowest ever. I mean, I know has been a war with a lower death rate of civilians compared to those who are armed, and they know all this, and they repeat Hamas talking points. They play their videos and they play along with it. They create an environment in this country and across Europe and in America, on campuses, on the streets, everywhere, where it becomes acceptable to be angry at the people who support an Israeli state, a Jewish state, because they're the nasty genocidal baby killers who are starving people en masse. And one of the things shouted by Jihad al-Shami when we were trying to get into the synagogue in Manchester, and these brave souls were holding the door against him, was this is for the children, this is the babies. Now, how much responsibility do government ministers like David Lammy, who frankly the booing and jeering of him when he went to a vigil was absolutely well deserved. How much do the BBC, the ministers and all of those who have played along with Hamas propaganda for the last 2 years, how much responsibility do they have for this?
A huge amount, I would say. And when I read that Jihad al-Shami said that as he was pushing against the door, he said, "This is for the children you killed," it chilled me to my bone, because I've written a few pieces over the past 2 years basically saying to everyone, please don't resuscitate the blood libel about Jews killing children. Please stop doing that, because we've seen demonstration after demonstration at which people have holding up placards saying the Jewish state murders children. We've seen demonstrations where people have carried dolls covered in blood and held them up in the faces of Orthodox Jews in Essex and other parts of the country. We've seen people breathe life back into the idea that the Jews take pleasure in killing kids. And the BBC has helped that along, because they broadcast the lie that thousands of kids would die in the next 36 hours if aid didn't get into Gaza.
That was a claim made by a big charity head, but they didn't question it at all.
They didn't question it. It went out. Everyone believed it. It spread like wildfire through the internet, and it wasn't true. There's this constant refrain that the Jewish state is uniquely murderous, uniquely barbaric, and uniquely invested in the death of children. Now, people say there's a difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, but let me tell you this. If you demonize the world's only Jewish state in that way, that will impact on Jewish people. You can't go around calling the Jewish nation the most barbarous nation on earth and then be surprised when Jewish civilians and citizens across the world get it in the neck as well.
Here's my question. When you get, I'm not going to name names, or I probably should, because, sue me for libel, because I reckon I'd win this one. But when some very senior figures at the BBC who were on air every morning, every evening, and really, I'm talking about long-standing presenters, people who've worked in war, as war reporters, they've seen every horror under the sun. When they report on what's happening in Gaza, not from Gaza, and they make complaints about that, but it's a war, it's a war zone. Whenever we've seen people in war zones before at the front line, and it's a tiny slip of land, it's all the front line. By the way, they've always been embedded with your allied forces rather than actually being able to roam freely. That's not happening in most wars. When they report on this stuff as if it is a uniquely appalling war with unique suffering, when just down the road you've got Yemen and Sudan and everywhere else where people are being slaughtered indiscriminately by government forces. When they do that, do you think they know that they're lying, or do you think they are now so caught up in that the virtue signalling, flag waving, middle class lefty viewpoint that they don't even realise that they are just repeating Hamas propaganda? Because I don't believe that they think what they're saying is true. I don't believe that people who've been war reporters for 20 years or however long don't know the realities on the ground.
It's so hard to tell, isn't it? Because it's possible that they've been so swept along by their own sense of self-righteousness that they really do believe it, that they really have become unable to see the reality, the truth, the more complex picture, that, even to look coolly at what happened on the 7th of October and how barbaric that was.
Were women raped? I mean, God, we haven't got a video of the actual women being raped, they claim. I think there actually are whip videos of that, which Hamas put out themselves, but there we are. But we have a questioning of things that are so obviously that did happen. It's terrifying.
Yeah, And, you know, the BBC, if you look at the BBC, for example, I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool BBC basher. I think it does some good stuff, and I think it does some rubbish stuff. But what it's done in relation to Israel-Gaza is unforgivable, because what it has done, it has pumped into the homes of this country every night for 2 years the following two messages. Firstly, this is the only war on earth. It's the only one you should think about. Nothing else is happening. Don't look at anything else. And the second thing it has said is that this is the worst war ever. It is uniquely barbarous. Children are dying left, right, and center. It's an absolute disgrace. It's given that dishonest message, that skewed message to people across the UK every night for 2 years. That is an unforgivable disavowal of its responsibility to tell the truth, and it hasn't told the truth.
That's the thing, isn't it? What do you make of this bid to ban repeated protests by, you know, the pro-Hamas crew, which is what they are? Because you know, you and I are both big advocates of free speech. You are more of a free speech libertarian than I am, even. I for a good year defended the right of these protests to go ahead, but it's more and more become obvious to me, even during that first year after October the 7th, the fact that the first march was organised while the massacre in Israel was still taking place. But you know, mothers were clutching their children being burnt to death in their kibbutz homes while they would go, oh, can we have a march because we're worried about Gaza? Like, and I had no idea if soldiers had even set foot into Gaza at that point. But they carried on. The anti-Semitic, you know, as you said, that the placards, the chants, you know, globalise the Intifada, from the rivers to the sea. That means both of those mean kill Jews and annihilate Israel. Should they be banned, or do the police have enough powers already to be banned, or should they bring in more laws? Where do you stand on all of that?
I'm not in favour of banning them, and it kind of sticks in my throat to say that, because I think they are obscene and obnoxious, and I think we have to be honest. I think they are anti-Semitic marches. Yep, that's what they are. And you know what? I think it's dawning on more people that that's the reality. You know, for 2 years now, these people have said we're on the right side of history. We are perfectly righteous. We are marching against genocide and for the poor people of Gaza, and they've got away with everything. But I think more and more ordinary people, even non-political people who I know, are starting to say, you know, what's going on here? Why are they still marching? Why did they march on the day that 2 Jews were killed in Manchester? More and more people are starting to ask that question. But the reason I'm not in favor of banning them is just because I think that would give the state too much power. And if it has the power to ban repeat protests, we know what it will go for next. It will go for pink ladies standing outside migrant hotels. It will go for those who are protesting against causes that the government is really scared about, like the question of migration and so on. So I'm worried about state overreach as a solution.
But here's the thing, though. I mean, we know we've seen two-tier justice, two-tier policing. We've seen an awful lot of that in the last couple of years. There's no doubt at all in my mind that if there was the same level of criminality and arrests and, you know, and outrageous racist slurs that were being held up on banners and behaviour of the people, and it was on the Tommy Robinson, you know, Night of the Kingdom style march, that would definitely be banned. We know that the PM office already has the powers to ban marches. We know that 13 marches were banned over a 7-year period up to 2015. 10 of those 13 were EDL and other far-right marches. So we know they can do it if they want, if they believe there is going to be, you know, breaches of the peace, public order and all of that. The only reason we don't see mass violence and trouble at these marches is because the police, they basically provide a, you know, as you go, feel free, carry on walking past service, rather than actually policing. If they policed these marches in the way that they should, as the law dictates, these wouldn't be peaceful marches. We can see that. Matthew Syed, who's absolutely lovely man, and very couldn't meet someone more polite and more reasonable. He said, you know, amazing piece in the papers the weekend, where he went along to the march on Saturday and was asking people, you know, why are you here? And do you think, you know, asking perfectly reasonable journalistic questions. And he's got a very nice manner. He's not a trouble stirrer. I mean, he said the aggression, the anger that he heard, he's left in no doubt at all. He spoke to 24 people and he said, you know, 22 of those 24 people were aggressive and angry and were basically shouting, you know, let's face it, anti-Semitic things. We wouldn't allow this about any other group. If someone organised a march where they were saying the same things and had the same level of aggression about black people or about Muslims, it wouldn't be allowed. So why? Why is this allowed?
You know, it's funny. I walked past one of these demonstrations a few weeks back, and I'm not quite as polite as Matthew Syed.
Yeah, I couldn't go because I know that I would not. I would end the day in a police cell. I know that.
Well, I screamed out "F Hamas" just to a bunch of people. I got hit. Someone hit me with his walking stick, just an old fella, so it wasn't that bad. I got surrounded by a bunch of young lads in keffiyehs who were pushing me and telling me to F off. That was the response to me saying something about Hamas. So I turned around to these people and said, hold on, so do you support Hamas? Of course, they do support Hamas. It's a rhetorical question. But, you know, you're absolutely right that the police already have powers. And the police, I'm afraid to say, I know they've got a hard job and they've got lots on their plate, but they have behaved badly in relation to these demonstrations. Remember, on one of the early demonstrations shortly after 7th of October, there was a gang of radical Islamists chanting for jihad against the Jewish state. Yeah. And the police put out a statement saying, well, jihad can have many different meanings. It means struggle, it means sacrifice. They made excuses for incitement to violence rather than policing it. Yeah. So I do think they already have powers to stop a breach of the peace, to stop people inciting violence, but they haven't used those powers on these marches, and that's what worries me most.
As is always the case, actually, when any government, and the Tories and Labour, they're just as bad as each other, let's bring in more powers. Nearly always it's a case of the powers they've already got not being used. Can I ask you just finally about Gary Neville? We had all the issues, didn't we, with Gary Lineker, who's working at the BBC, giving his tuppence worth, knowing absolutely sod all about anything other than football. I don't mind him giving his views, but he just can't work at the BBC while he spouts his absolute nonsense while I'm having to pay his wages, and he's got a contract saying he can't spout political views. But Sky Sports got a problem now with Gary Neville, who's always in trouble. I mean, whether it's the courts or with the newspapers or wherever, over things he said. But he's at £1.1 million a year. There's a boycott call against Sky Sports for continuing to employ him over what people are calling a racist outburst. We did this long video about the union and the England flags that are being hung up everywhere, and saying this is divisive. This is posted, by the way, since the attack on the Manchester synagogue, and he said he basically this is all being, the division is being created by angry middle-aged white men. Should he? I mean, is it okay for him to say that? Is that racist? If he said angry middle-aged Muslim men or angry middle-aged black men, would people be defending him? And should Sky Sports face a boycott? You know,
it's I think it is racist. I mean, he's judging people by their race, and he's making a sweeping generalization about a group of people with a particular skin color. You know, imagine if after the Manchester synagogue attack, someone, me or you, were to say, the problem is young brown men. We wouldn't say that because we don't believe that. The problem is a certain group of radicalized people that exist in this community and in other communities too. So he made a sweeping generalization about a certain race, a certain group, and I think that's a problem. But, again, it speaks to that cowardice, just that unwillingness among these champagne socialists to face up to the reality of the divisions that have been caused by multiculturalism, the fact that there is a particular problem of radicalism among young Muslims, and we should be allowed to say it. It's this racial paternalism. He feels he has to protect Muslim community from criticism or black community from criticism. That's a kind of racial paternalism in and of itself. Middle-aged white men get so much flack, but they're not actually doing the bad stuff.
I don't think that most people are actually terrified of the middle-aged white men, coming at them in the streets and attempting to kill them in their places of worship. I want to talk to you first of all about this China spy case. We ended up talking to Tom Tugendhat in the last half hour as well, because we had to move his time. But this Chinese spy case, I think a lot of people are sort of, what's this all about? It's the front page of the papers occasionally. It was a case that never came to trial. We've got two men allegedly accused of spying for China. Of course, they're not coming to trial. You're innocent until proven guilty in this country. But we understand that that this trial has collapsed, and the claim seems to be at the deliberate behest of the government. That seems to be the claim in the Sunday papers. What do you believe has actually happened? What do we know has happened?
Well, there's a legalistic way of looking at this, which is the differences in the Official Secrets Act that existed before the National Intelligence Act of 2023. So in the Official Secrets Act, you have to be caught with intelligence that could be useful to an enemy, not the enemy, but an enemy. And if this were to happen today, that distinction wouldn't arise, because there is a discrete offence of having information which you pass to a foreign intelligence agency. So if you're spying for, let's say, China, you will be in contact with Chinese intelligence, and therefore you are working for a foreign intelligence agency.
I mean, frankly, I don't want someone passing intelligence they're not supposed to pass to France. I mean, you know, they skip over. But the specifics of that law, and these two men who were allegedly accused of this crime were charged with a crime which it had to be an enemy state. And we understand from talking to Tom Tugendhat and reading the reports that the government basically came forward and said that this case no longer meets the evidence threshold, but suggesting that at one point it did, and now it doesn't.
I think that's a load of old cobblers.
Oh, yeah.
And we should never forget that when we're dealing with spooks and spookery, we're dealing with a wilderness of mirrors.
Right.
We're in the territory of in my father's house there are many mansions. So my take on this is, yes, there is reluctance in government to call China an enemy. Goodness knows why. I mean, everything that China has done in recent years, we think of the £500,000 they gave to Barry Gardiner, the Labour MP. We think of this was the Christine Lee affair. Now, she wasn't convicted of being a spy, but that showed clear Chinese interference. And the former head, the current head of MI6 and the current head of MI5 have both warned that China represents a real and present danger to the security of this country.
I mean, it's a bit of a giveaway, isn't it? And we know, you know, they're making hostile noises about, of course, about Taiwan, also helping Russia in their war effort in Ukraine.
Absolutely so. You know, so what do you have to do to be considered an enemy or a potential enemy?
China is a really rich country. We do a lot of trade with them. We had the, you know, the Prime Minister sort of desperate to do a big trade deal with China. Again, as it was, I think, in terms of investment, I mean, it was absolute, you know, tuppence down the back of the sofa for both our economy and the Chinese economy. But China's basically, it's bought up a lot of our universities, the funding they're throwing in, trying to buy up a lot of our MPs, spying on us, intimidating and even murdering, as Putin has done in Russia, Chinese dissidents in this country. I mean, again, what do they need to do? Why doesn't our government want to call them an enemy state?
I think the answer is a political one, not an intelligence one. I think our spooks are making us aware that China is a real threat to us here in the UK, both domestically and on the international front, but that economic growth and the drive for economic growth to fund our government's programme is so vital that we have to turn a blind eye to what the government would consider indiscretions on the part of Chinese.
And there's still some talk about this Chinese super embassy being built right near the Tower of London.
Well, that's a disgrace
on the routes over cables which go to the city. I mean, everyone who's got half a brain has said this is an absolute madness, and yet the government have sort of called in the planning decision to go, oh, maybe we will, maybe we won't. And there's reports at the weekend that the Chinese had basically cut off the water and electricity to Britain's embassy in Beijing.
It would be the largest embassy in China anywhere, probably in the world, but certainly in Europe, and it would become the headquarters of Chinese intelligence work throughout Europe. So it is complete and utter madness, and because it is complete and utter madness, they don't want the opportunity to interrogate, for the Parliament to interrogate the decision that they've taken. That's always a sign of weakness. And to say that, well, officially China isn't an enemy under the 1911 Official Secrets Act, that's a real cop-out.
No, but that's just semantics, isn't it? But this thing, what is the bit I don't understand? Look, we've got a government that has, you know, sold out, you know, Diego Garcia military base, the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. I mean, utterly unnecessary under any international ruling whatsoever. Basically, for want of a better expression, kowtowing to the Chinese on this, whether it's over the embassy, whether it's over you know, this particular alleged spy case. I don't understand why any national government, I don't care whether I voted for a government or not. I like to think the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, the Security, the Home Office Minister would put the safety of British people first and security of our nation, and they're not doing that.
the delivery of security is the primary duty of any government. Indeed, Margaret Thatcher, I think, was right when she said it is by far the most important duty of any government. All the stuff that follows, health, social services, disability benefits, they're all way down the list. So it has got to do this, and we all understand the government needs growth because otherwise it's going to go bankrupt.
But not at the cost of selling our safety down the river.
No, because just as in other discussions, we must never put security below liberty. When it comes to the economy, we must not put it above security. We need security, we need a good economy, we need liberty, but we also need to secure our freedoms from those people who are undermining it all the time.
I don't know about you lot, just when after you've spoken to that mum, everything's kind of in perspective now, isn't it? You know, I mean, I've got an 18-year-old. The idea I didn't know if my 18-year-old was being tortured and starved in a tunnel or was dead. I mean, whoa, those are my two choices right now. I mean, she's just gone off to uni. I'd have to walk past her empty bed. That's bad enough when you've got an only child. But I mean, it kind of puts everything in perspective. Some silly, stupid, inane, ignorant students doing their stupid demos. Oh, just do one, the lot of you. I'm so fed up. And also, Gary Neville, you, along with the other Gary Lineker, you can do one as well. He's blamed angry, middle-aged white men flying their Union flags, flying their England flags for dividing this nation. No, I'm pretty sure they're not the problem. I think they're probably part of the solution, Gary. But let's talk about this with Rafe Haidel-Manku, who joins us now. He's a senior fellow at the New Cultural Forum and an all-round very sensible fellow. Very, very good afternoon to you, Rafe.
Great to be with you as always, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. I so appreciate you taking your time. Gary Neville, I mean, I just thought he was kind of an angry middle-aged white man himself, but I don't know why he thought that it was sensible to do a video in the wake of the Manchester synagogue attack in which 2 people died and 3 people in hospital, and caused terror to the Jewish community and brought shame, I think, on our country. That he thought, I know who's the problem, who's to blame for division in this country. It's people putting up Union and England flags. Why would anyone think that, Rafe?
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be competing with Lineker for the title of most obnoxious Gary at the moment. It's deeply insensitive to say it when he said it. It's deeply offensive also to the Jewish community to say that they are intimidated by seeing the Union flag. He mentioned that there were Union flags close to the Jewish community.
How outrageous!
During the pro-Israeli or the Jewish marches through London, you saw the Union flag and the Israeli flag side by side, something you didn't see in the Palestinian marches. I was in Belfast last year, and if you go to the Republican areas, you see the Irish flag flying alongside the Palestinian flag. If you go to the Loyalist areas, the Union flag flies alongside the Israeli flag. We need to understand precisely where loyalties lie here. We know where the problems lie. You know, almost every one of the most major terrorist attacks in this country have been committed by the children of asylum seekers who've come here from war-torn Islamic countries. So you can look at Southport, you can look at Manchester Arena, Manchester Synagogue, London Bridge,
Manchester Arena. It's extraordinary. Across the board, almost all of the attacks in this country are committed by people, Islamist extremists. Almost all the people on the watch list are Islamist extremists, and almost all of those committed attacks are the children of or themselves migrants from particular countries where we've imported this terrible fascist ideology. I mean, do you think people are finally waking up to that?
Look, I don't think.
If not Gary Neville.
I don't think they understand quite how serious this is. You know, there are at least 45,000 people on the MI5 terror watch list, probably closer to 50,000 now. Between 80 and 90% of them are Islamists. To put that in context, today's October the 7th. We have more people on our terror watch list than the size of Hamas on October the 7th when they launched their offensive against Israel. It's larger number than the size of the ISIS army in Iraq when they launched their offensive in 2014. There are 4.5 million Muslims here. Look, the majority of them are well adjusted, and that's to be celebrated, and they're integrated. But 1 in every 100 Muslims in this country is on the terror watch list. And polling shows that
What?
actually...
What?
One in every 1 in 100 Muslims is on the terror watch list. Now, to put that into even more context, polling shows that 9% of Muslims, still a minority, but 9% identify as being Islamist or being extremist and radicals. 9% is around 350,000 to 400,000 people. Yeah. So when people try to dismiss all of these terror attacks as being, oh, it's only a fringe minority of the population, it's not a fringe minority, maybe a minority, but these are sizable numbers of people we're talking about. And with the Muslim population planning to essentially, the demographers believe they will possibly double or more in the next 25 years, you're going to get to a point where actually the size of the terror watch list will be larger than the size of the full-time British Army. It's already half the size of the full-time British Army. And if you look at the number of people who claim to be jihadis, it's larger than the size of the American Army. Yeah. These are real discussions which we're not having in this country. We have a government that won't even use the word Islamist when referring to the Manchester synagogue attackers. You have people like Gary Neville trying to deflect blame onto decent white British patriotic people in a snobbish attack on the white working class. There is a real issue in this country. The government has agreed to increase defence spending from between 2.5% to 5% for external threats. What are they doing for the domestic threat, which I would argue is just as strong as the external threat, arguably even stronger? We can't keep our heads in the sand. The first duty of any government is to protect the nation and its people. This is a complete dereliction of duty by the Labour Party. People in the media should be pointing this out rather than trying to turn attention onto the white working class.
I mean, every single word, Rafe. Speaking sense. I'm sure people are cheering at the radio and at the computer screens right now. But this is the thing. I'm sure at this point I have to say, oh, no, it sounds terribly racist and bigoted and Islamophobic, Rafe. But you're just saying facts, and these are the facts. And again, is it not a good idea that we acknowledge and accept some facts? And again, polling again and again, telling us what a lot of particularly young Muslims, particularly young second-generation Muslims in this country believe. But also, by the way, we've got an awful lot of white British, young sort of left-wingers who absolutely have signed up to this mad ideology as well and are supporting it, and consider the people who follow this ideology, not the religion, the political ideology, as victims in some way who need to have protests for themselves. And on a day like this, on October the 7th, when we're marking the 2nd anniversary of this massacre. Do you think we have, because I like to think we have now passed a turning point. I've been talking about this stuff since about 2000. I was well aware of we want to talk about integration, issues like that as well in a few moments with you as well. Well aware of it from working on a local paper in the East End of London, way back in the 90s. Do you think that there has been a turning point in this country where shouting racist and bigot and Islamophobe and fascist at people who point out A, facts, and B, uncomfortable truths about our society and the lack of integration and the threat to mainstream society, that actually that no longer works anymore, and people are insisting that this is dealt with and that they don't want to look back in anger when there's a terrorist threat. They don't think it's acceptable that we deal with attacks on a Jewish synagogue with more security for synagogues, or attacks on a bridge, more bollards on bridges, and an attack in an airport. Oh, now we can't carry water or our laptop or whatever it is, or have to take our shoes off for security at an airport. That actually we want the root problem dealt with and possibly removed, rather than we all just learn to live with it.
Yes. Have you noticed also that the political class have stopped saying that diversity is our greatest strength?
No, not Labour. They're still saying it.
You couldn't go through a month without a mayor or police commissioner saying that. But of course, the people can see right through it now. They know what's going on. And I think Southport also was a key pivotal moment where you had the Prime Minister calling people criminals before they were even arrested or charged or convicted, calling them far-right thugs. And they saw elderly pensioners, they saw old ladies and aunties in those protests. The British people for too long were afraid of speaking up in defense of their country, in defense of their identity, for fear of being called far right, for fear of being called racist. But now those words are meaningless and they're not standing for it anymore. The British people have been abandoned by the political class, abandoned by the media class, abandoned by leaders like Gary Neville and others, and they've taken it upon themselves now to stand up for themselves. That's why you're seeing flags being flown, for example. They're not being flown in some sort of act of bombastic jingoism. They're being flown almost as a sign of distress.
I was going to say desperation.
Yeah.
We're still here. Can I very quickly play you a clip of what Robert Jenrick had to say? This was a recording which I think the Guardian think is a gotcha. I'm pretty sure he probably gave it to the Guardian himself about a visit to a Birmingham ward of Handsworth earlier this month.
In Birmingham the other day to do a video on litter, and it was absolutely appalling. It's as close as I've come to a slum in this country. But the other thing that I noticed there was that it was one of the worst integrated places that I've ever been to. In fact, in the hour and a half that I was filming with news there, I didn't see another white face. And that's not the kind of country I want to live in. I want to live in a country where people are properly integrated. It's not about the colour of your skin or your faith. Of course it isn't. But I want people to be living alongside each other, not parallel lives. That's not the right way we want to live as a country.
Rafe Hadel-Menku, did Robert Jenrick say anything wrong there?
Spot on, and bravo to him for saying it, and I hope he did actually leak that to the Guardian himself. Look, we know from all the evidence that these segregated communities, Muslims who live in those communities, are more than twice as likely to be extremist. These segregated communities often act like, sort of petri dishes for the cultivation of cultural practices that we would find completely abhorrent in our culture. You see that with forced marriage, with cousin marriage, honour killings, acid attacks. Of course, we've had the rape gang scandal as well. So much else that we would be completely horrified by the subjugation of women. We also know from books like Ed Hussein, who wrote the book Among the Mosques, that white men aren't welcome in certain areas if they're in these segregated communities. That's why also you're not seeing white faces, because white people are scared to go. We also know from other studies that police often have to contact community leaders to arrange a time when they can visit these communities. Basically, we're creating Muslim settlements here, which are often led by Muslim clans from their homeland countries who are trying
self-appointed leaders.
Trying to recreate politically and territorially their own system of government with Sharia courts. These are descending into ethno-nationalist silos. There's a reason that their property prices are increasing in the southwest of England. That's because of white flight out of many of these cities going in. We are becoming increasingly not a united kingdom, but a united nations, and we cannot allow that in this country.
Really appreciate you joining us for that. Very hard-hitting words. Rafe Hadel-Menku, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. Just a brief response from Russell Quirk listening to all that. He's a Reform councillor.
God, he's good, isn't he?
Isn't he?
He's spot on.
Nailed it. I'm sorry, but we need people to be saying this stuff.
And these facts are really uncomfortable. But isn't it time that we debated facts? And then try and provide a solution to the problems that relate to those facts?
I'm just going to pretend I'm working at the BBC and just look shocked and horrified and call everyone a racist. Let's speak now to Trevor Cavan. He's former political editor of The Sun and joins us. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. What do you make of the Prime Minister basically sort of pleading, begging with students and others not to take part in protests planned for today at various universities and elsewhere, which have been variously described as honouring our martyrs and celebrating 2 years of resistance, but come on the second anniversary of the brutal Hamas massacre on October the 7th. And the Prime Minister said these protests are un-British. What do you make of his plea?
Well, I think I make of it what I make of Keir Starmer generally over the last 18 months or so, which is that he's weak and pathetic, and that these mealy-mouthed words will be simply brushed aside by the people they're aimed at. I mean, the Americans have, of course, the First Amendment to the American Constitution, which enshrines free speech, but even there are provisos, and you cannot shout fire in a crowded cinema. Well, we're in a crowded cinema right now, and these are inflammatory protests which are terrifying to a minority of the population, but nonetheless a significant minority, which is the Jewish population. And after the murder of worshippers at the synagogue in Manchester, the reality of that threat, the reality of crying fire in a crowded theatre, is manifestly clear to all of us. It's a potential running disaster.
It is quite sort of bewildering that people would think it was appropriate. And I was saying earlier, you know, the display of just ignorance and immorality and is just quite shocking. A lot of people think, again, this is foreign. This is stuff that's happening in another country. It's not, but it actually tells us quite a lot about ourselves, doesn't it? It tells us about the people who we walk amongst and have to sit next to on the tube on the way home from work, you know, with their cafes on and they think virtue signalling as they support a terrorist group. But also it tells us a lot about our own politics, because this is massively impacting decisions made on our foreign policy and indeed our home policy by this government.
And it is a commentary on the makeup of the fabric of our society in 21st century Britain, because Keir Starmer has called for and endorsed a free Palestine. Well, he has imported and presided over one being created here on our doorstep. And in London, it is so manifestly clear that we have a very strongly worded view about what's happening in Israel. And they have hijacked various words in the process with complete negligence of their actual meaning. The word genocide was defined in 1944 after enormously careful deliberation by the people who looked at the Holocaust afterwards and worked out what exactly had happened. And genocide means, very precisely, the systematic destruction of a people, a race, in this case, the Jews. It doesn't mean the dislocation of countries and civilians in the process of fighting a war.
Otherwise, every country, including Britain, that's ever fought a war, would be committing genocide.
That is true. And in fact, if they were prepared to look at the facts on the ground, these protesters would realize that, in fact, the Israeli army go to some considerable lengths to try not to kill civilians.
And this has been well verified by independent observers and senior military figures who've been on, watching the command and control going on. I mean, this thing, so much of this is based on absolute ignorance. Again, if you only watch the BBC, genuinely, you would have no idea what's really going on. You'd have not a single fact at your place. What do you make of another little conversation about facts, though, because Robert Jenrick is in the news today, but less as a Shadow Justice Secretary for accusing 35 judges of pro-migrant bias here and saying he wants to get rid of the sentencing council and the like, but more for what The Guardian has obviously thought of as a gotcha, which is a recording of him speaking about walking around in Birmingham, particularly in the Handsworth ward, one of the most deprived wards in Birmingham, where there is a 90+% percentage of people who are non-white, a large number of people who don't speak English as a first language or at all, or are from overseas. And he said, basically, very, very simply, that he didn't see another white face and criticised the lack of integration. Is that a gotcha by The Guardian?
Well, The Guardian would count it as a gotcha, but it's looking for gotchas all the time. It's a grievance newspaper. And they completely ignore the facts on the ground, which are unignorable to the rest of the society. And we have become a migrant nation, and we are, as Trevor Phillips, the former head of Equal Opportunities Commission, has predicted, that we will become a majority black country in the course of this century. You cannot ignore these facts, but the left, particularly the wishy-washy hand-wringing Guardian, will ignore the actual facts on the ground and protest until it's out of breath on this.
But there's almost that it's in somehow just pointing this out is racist, just to notice the fact. But even when Robert Jenrick was very, very clear, and he said that's not the kind of country I want to live in. I want to live in a country where people are properly integrated. It's not about the colour of your skin, he said, or your religion. Of course it isn't. I want people to be living alongside each other, not parallel lives.
Well, he's absolutely right. And I think that he speaks actually for a very large number of Conservative supporters. And I think that Kemi Badenoch wouldn't disagree with a word of it. The fact is that we need assimilation. The only successful form of immigration is via assimilation. And in certain cultures, we're like mixing oil and water. They are not going to assimilate. They have got sufficient numbers for them to live basically in isolated communities on their own. not really speaking much to the bulk of the rest of the society. And they are developing a way of life which is at least foreign to the bulk of this country. You can describe these things in various terms, but immediately you are smeared as fascist and racist.
Do you think
it's the language that counts?
Yes, and of course it is. That's so important. But do you think that actually this works anymore? I was just talking with Russell Quirk, my guest in the studio today, that actually this sort of claim that anyone who states a fact, a blatant fact, is somehow racist, that people talking about this and the lack of integration and the problems with particular communities, lack of integration and the sheer numbers, that actually, shouting racist at everybody who says this stuff doesn't really work anymore.
Well, I hope it doesn't, but it's a tried and tested and systematic process of the hard left. It literally is Orwellian. If you read 1984, this is exactly what happened in that book, which was extremely prophetic of where we are today. Whatever right or wrong argument you put forward, the left will smear it. They will take your words out of context. They will label it in a way which is offensive and wrong. And somehow or other that takes off. And they've managed to gag debate on this absolutely vital issue for the last 25 years. And it's working. Unfortunately, we are now discussing the reason why we cannot say what we mean is because we are treading on eggshells for fear of being labelled.
Yeah, I just don't think people are fearful anymore, and I think it did work for a lot of years. I was talking about this stuff in 2000. I was writing for the Sunday Express, but I know that the cat's out of the bag now. Let me ask you just finally: Tory Party conference is taking place, and obviously they're out of office, they're out in their ear, way behind in the polls. It's not looking great for Kemi Badenoch's future right now. And a new poll out yesterday has suggested that 2/3 of Tory Party members want a pact, an electoral pact with reform. Would you support that? Do you think that is something that would benefit either or both parties, or do you think that would be a big mistake?
It's very difficult to say now. It's still possibly 2 to 4 years from when we're going to have to put that to the test. If we are in the same position as we are now in that period, then yes, I think that some sort of coalition, if only to get rid of this horrific government. It would be, I think, a travesty if we had an election and we had two right-wing factions put to the margins because of a coalition of Labour and the Greens and the Liberal Democrats carrying on the wreckage that they're committing to this country. But I think that actually, I'm delighted to say that what Kemi is beginning to say is beginning to resonate. And you are seeing people with some brain cells actually saying that they're joining the Conservative Party. I mean, this is quite a triumph in the circumstance. I mean, looking at what's going on screen in Manchester, with all of those empty seats, and you and I remember vividly the times when those audiences, you couldn't find room to walk around the place all day and all night, and early in the morning, and the leftovers were lying on the couches from the night before. It's dead up there, but there is a chord to be struck, and I think Kemi is beginning to strike.
Well, again, people thought that about Labour coming in 2019, and they're in power right now with a massive majority. So we shall see. He's a former Labour Party spokesman, very much not a member of the Labour Party anymore, as you're always keen to point out, James. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks for clarifying that.
I know you always like me to. Now, look, I just want to ask you first of all about this China spy case, because we've got a war of words between the current Director of Public Prosecutions, Stephen Punxsutaw, and the former Director of Public Prosecutions, now the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, over who's responsible for the collapse of this spy case. Must point out that the two men who've been alleged to have been spies do deny all charges, Christopher Barry and Chris Cash. But the chief prosecutor, the DPP, basically says the government collapsed this trial because they wouldn't provide the evidence, which he believes it does exist, that they believe China to be an enemy state. But the Prime Minister says that's not true. Who do you believe, the current or the former DPP?
I think it's very difficult at the moment. I mean, I obviously don't understand the kind of technicalities of the case, as I'm not an expert in this area of law.
I don't think the Prime Minister does.
Well, I don't think any of them do. I think there's a general fear of China in general. I find this in Westminster quite a lot. On the Tory side, you see that kind of manifest as a kind of saber rattle, and we need to be strong. We need to kind of go against the China and everything. On the Labour side, there's this idea of international trade deals coming before security and defence, which is always quite questionable. And there's always been an issue on the Labour side, funnily enough, of defence issues and being strong on language. You're okay to do it with Putin, right? That's kind of like well-trodden ground. You can do it with Putin. But when it comes to other countries, the likes of China, which is a kind of rising threat and has been considered to be a rising threat by most of our allies, there's always a discomfort around it, which I've always found interesting.
It's because we do a lot more trade with China. I mean, that's the reality. It's about the money. But again, a lot of people are very wary of this, aren't they? Can I ask you about the Tory conference? Because obviously Kemi Badenoch in less than an hour is going to be giving her big keynote speech. A lot of people are talking about she won't make it past the May local elections, when both your old lot, Labour, and the Tories are expected to get an absolute trouncing by parties like Reform and probably Lib Dems and I don't know whatever the Jezbollah party is called, the Greens, whoever. We often have these sort of protest votes, but there's even talk that she could face a shadow cabinet, an attempt to oust her even before then. What do you make of the threat to the two biggest parties from the parties sort of supposedly to the left and to the right? Is that something to be welcomed? The end, it would appear, this has been prophesied before, of the two-party politics in this country?
Yeah, I would with caution say that it's the end of it. It's certainly, they're under threat at the moment, but they have this kind of wonderful ability because of our political system benefiting Labour and the Tories to bounce back from this. And unless significant changes are made to our voting system and the way that we do elections, then I don't see it being a huge threat. You've got to remember as well as our kind of elected legislature, we've got things like the House of Lords that complicate things even more when it comes to the matter. But I do think that overall, it should be a lesson for the Tories and for Labour. It's one that that Labour seem to have been aware of, at least in the last couple of weeks. They've tailored their message. They're trying to adjust it to fit the threat of reform. But the problem is with the Tories, I still don't see them taking that seriously. And the irony is, reform were a product of the Tories. They're a product. They came from the belly of that beast because of the Brexit issue, because of various other issues. The Eurosceptic wing of the Tory party broke off. And without that kind of collapse in the Tory vote, you wouldn't have seen that swell in reform. And we're seeing every week. It's not even a news story anymore. The Conservative councillors are crossing the floor and joining reform. So it will be a question eventually of who has more sway, who is the predominant right-wing party in British politics and centre-right politics. Is it reform or is it the Tory party? We'll have to see what happens.
Well, we shall see what happens there. A lot of criticism of the Shadow Justice Secretary in the last few days, again, by, I would say, the usual suspects, over what we had Robert Jenrick saying about a visit to Hamsworth in Birmingham, where he talked about how, they didn't see another white face, and saying it looked like a slum, and he said it's one of the worst integrated places. He also said it's not about, skin colour or faith. It was... Well, I mean, he categorically stated that. He's now being accused of fueling toxic nationalism. I don't know why nationalism is toxic, but...
Well, toxic nationalism is. That's a different kind of nationalism. You can have nationalism, you can have toxic nationalism, it's just the fact that it's toxic. And when you're saying it's not about skin colour, when he says that, but then in the same breath, he said, I didn't see another white face. What does that mean?
Well, he didn't see another white face. That's what it means.
But what
he went to an area in Birmingham where he didn't see another white face. This is a 91. This Hamsworth is a 91% ethnic minority populated area. And it's largely Muslim, but there's actually other groups as well. But he's pointed out that we don't have integration and multinational. What we've got is areas which are completely separate, living parallel lives. He said, I want to live in a country where people are properly integrated. It's not about the colour of your skin or your faith. He says, but I want people to be living alongside each other, not parallel lives.
But it is
What's
about
not
the
to like about that? Sort of thing Martin Luther King would have said.
No, but it is about the colour of your skin, though, isn't it? Because he's made that assessment on the fact that he's not seen any white faces. How many of those non-white faces that he saw were British?
Well, but he wasn't pointing out that they weren't British. In fact, actually, that ward has a very high number of people who come from abroad. It's got something like, I think, 17% of people who don't speak English. It's not their first. Well, about 37%, I think, don't speak as their first language, and about half of those, according to the official stats, don't speak English well or at all. So what he pointed out was all absolutely true. Is pointing out facts, is that toxic? Is that racist?
Yes, if you're using them in the way that he's using them.
How did he use them?
Pointing facts out like that. Because he didn't go to rural Northumberland, where I'm from, and say, my God, there's not any brown faces around here.
We're a white country. We are historically a white country.
Right, Julia, that's where we get into an issue here.
Because that's a fact.
We start conflating skin colour and race
with
our culture
you just
and our
mentioned...
identity.
No, I'm not conflating race and skin colour with our... No, it is a matter of fact that the vast majority of people in this country now and have always been white, and it's only recently that we've had a large influx in the last few decades, in fact, particularly in the last 2 decades, of people who are not white. We are a white country, in the same way that Nigeria is a black country, and India, people are Asian, or of Indian ethnicity. This is not complicated for any other country.
There aren't people going around in Nigeria, are there, and looking for white faces and saying, "Ooh, we're not sure."
But hold on a minute. We have people sort of, various, the National Trust or whatever. All these people saying, "Oh, there aren't enough white people in the countryside." We have people like Jon Snow, and he was on Channel 4 complaining that he'd never seen so many white faces at a Brexit march. I mean, so it is actually commented on all the time as somehow a bad thing. He wasn't saying it was a bad thing that there were people of colour. He was pointing out that they were. This was a community living a parallel life.
I don't understand why you need to go to the lengths that you do to defend Robert Jenrick on this.
I'm not going to any lengths.
Why are you defending him on it?
Why wouldn't I defend someone saying facts?
Why do you feel that Robert Jenrick, in doing this, which is something that the majority of people I've spoken to, by the way, were like, "Oh, that's awful. That's not nice."
What was awful? I don't understand what was awful about it.
And yet you feel the need to come out with some big defence of him because you think he's just speaking facts, right?
No, I feel the need always to defend people saying things. Telling us
most of us wouldn't speak like that because it doesn't matter to me what the colour of the faces of the people are on the street. It does to you, and I've just got to ask you why, because it doesn't.
It doesn't matter to me the colour of the people on the street. What matters is whether we have communities that are integrated and living alongside each other and sharing the same culture. There is ample evidence, numerous government reports, numerous reports by think tanks that have shown that actually we are not an integrated society. We have effectively ghettos of people from different faith and religion, faith and ethnic backgrounds living separate parallel lives.
I ask you what those people of colour could be doing to show Robert Jenrick and to show you who are bothered about it that they're supposedly integrated, regardless of their national identity.
Well, I would suggest a large number of them being able to speak English might be a good idea.
Okay, but that's 17%. You've already said that's a minority, so that's not. That's
quite a lot of people in one little ward.
In one ward, yeah, absolutely. But the majority, it's not the case. Would you like to see them, when you see these people taking on British culture and supposedly becoming integrated, do you want to see them in church?
The vast majority of people in this country don't go to church. That's not the point.
I'm not going to a church. I don't believe in God.
No, so neither do I. So that wouldn't be part of it.
What do you want to see them do?
What do we want to see people do? I think what he means, he can come on and speak for himself, is what he means.
No, I'm asking you.
No, I'm asking what would I like? I think I would like people like you to accept that there is actually a history of this country which is not based on diversity and multiculturalism.
You would like me to accept that we're a white nation?
Accept the fact of our history and the people of this country.
Who do you identify with, the Saxons or the Romans or the Danes? Which one are you identifying?
Well, I'm half Irish heritage, so I don't really know.
Okay.
But I don't identify with a lot of the multicultural identities that we do now have in this country. I identify as British and English. That's what I identify as.
Well, Julia, I've got bad news for you about British and English, because unfortunately, historically, we have been a huge melting pot.
Oh, you see, again, that's just not true. That's just not true. The level of immigration to this country until the Blair years was in the low thousands a year. In some years, there was net immigration.
When we talk about English, what are we? Because when I come from Northumbria and I look at my DNA and I look at my history, I'm Scandinavian, right? Because it's all Vikings and the Danelaw, everyone who came across here. People in the south of England, a lot of the times, they've been there for a long time and they talk about their heritage and their history.
Not been there for a long time. British people for millennia, for centuries.
Not millennia, no.
Yes, millennia. Yeah,
no, not millennia, Julia. People haven't been here for millennia. This is the problem.
Millennia. You don't think anyone lived in this country 2,000 years ago? Mate, the Romans invaded. We were here then.
You don't know, but the idea of this modern... This modern English or British culture and idea, the idea of that being millennia, people were wearing Thor's hammer necklaces, Julia. People were praying to different gods. The idea of Christianity and modern English culture being existing for millennia is nonsense.
Well, again, I don't think you understand the word millennia for a start. Nicole Lampert is a journalist and campaigner with the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and joins us now. Good morning to you, Nicole.
Hi, thank you for having me on today,
Thank
Julia.
you so much, and I follow your Twitter feed, and it is absolutely extraordinary what we have seen on social media, what we've seen on our streets, on university campuses and the like. Just run us through some of the things that people thought it was appropriate to do on the anniversary of the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust.
Well, at almost every university, we've had people outside screaming, celebrating, calling for more intifada. It should be said that, these claim to be pro-Palestinian people, but they're quite the opposite, because if they were pro-Palestinians, they would be calling for peace. You don't hear any call for peace. You hear calls for intifada, revolution, more war. We've had that outside universities. We've had that in the streets of London. We've had it almost non-stop, haven't we, for the last 2 years. We saw it in particular after the murders in Manchester. And of course, on October 7, the anniversary of the massacre in Israel, we've seen this particular joy in it. And that's all I can really describe as, in that they are happy about it. They are happy about what happened. And they'll either deny what happened, or they'll say Israel did it to themselves.
Yeah.
And this is a way of trying to take over our pain, pretend it didn't happen. Yeah. And claim that there's no reason for this war, and we've seen even with some media organisations almost trying to forget about what happened. With the BBC, they put out a statement about the coverage of the war and talked about not an invasion but an escalation.
Yeah, I mean, again, it is extraordinary that it's happening, and I see it whenever I post stuff online now. I get, I'm a Gaza, genocide baby killer. I'm taking £7,000 for every posting. I mean, you and I are making an absolute fortune if that's the case, are we not, Nicole? Yeah, exactly. If only. But also, again, deny that it happened. Or well, they deliberately they wanted it to happen, and everybody at Nova Festival was actually killed by Israeli forces. I mean, all of this stuff is provably untrue. All of it is provably. The evidence is there. We know what happened on the day because Hamas sodding filmed it and put it on social media themselves. They weren't ashamed of it. At least the Nazis had the decency to be ashamed and trying to do it behind closed doors when they were killing Jews. This lot, they're literally proud as punch about it. And even people not just, I can sort of almost write off idiot students. You know, you think the world's about to die because of climate change, and that Jews are the cause of every problem. I mean, you know, these are evil, awful people. If they're foreign students, I want them out tomorrow. If they're British students, I want them re-educated. I'll bring them in the studio and explain to them some facts. But when you get a doctor, we've got an NHS doctor, Dr. Rama Aladwan. She works at the Royal Free Hospital. It's a Jewish area. It's in Hampstead. Okay? It's a very famous hospital. I was there the other week with an elderly relative. You know, the idea that I would be treated by this woman, or any of my Jewish friends would be treated by this woman, is absolutely appalling. She tweeted yesterday, "Glory to the breaking of the 17-year-long illegal siege." I mean, illegal siege. I mean, you know, glory to the Palestinian resistance. Glory to our martyrs, and the Al-Aqsa flood. Palestine, Gaza, and then a heart. And with the picture, we've got it up there, with the picture of one of the diggers that broke through the fence between Gaza and Palestine to allow murderous, raping, hostage-taking terrorists through to slaughter innocent people. She's still employed by the NHS. She's allowed to treat patients, paid for by the taxpayer. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, she's not working at the Royal Free anymore, so
Well, thank God for that.
I'm not sure where she's working, but a few weeks ago, the GMC, they did attempt to have her licence suspended, and she was put before a medical tribunal, and the medical tribunal, and this obviously what she said yesterday is something else, but she's been saying this sort of stuff for months. They said that this was down to her free speech. So that is the extent, and it did lead to Wes Streeting a couple of weeks ago saying there's a problem within the NHS. But
yeah, well then sort it out. Yeah,
he's the guy in charge. But actually, this week I've been investigating some of the root causes of this sort of language and what's happening. I wrote a piece in the Telegraph. I'm going to do a kind of version on my Substack, and it's about what we're seeing in our society and how anti-Semitism drives societies crazy. Yeah. And this is a kind of Soviet ideology, and that's what we're seeing on our streets. So Zionism is therefore, everything that's bad in the world is Zionism. Zionism is apartheid, it's genocide, all of these things that we know anyone can look at and see is not true. Yeah. And so this isn't just about Jews, this is about destabilising our society.
And I think a lot of people don't get that. I say this is a rot at the heart of Western societies, Western civilization and our liberal democratic values. But also, again, people not realising how much this is being pushed by, you know, the Russian bots, by the Chinese bots, by the Iranian bots. This is a multi-million pound operation. We're told, oh no, the Israelis are paying all these influences. If Israel, which is a pretty functioning state and certainly has a very, very well-functioning military and you know, spy network, if they were paying people to do their PR for them internationally, they'd have been doing a better job of it. In the same way that if they wanted to impose a genocide on people in Gaza, they'd have managed to do it in the last 2 years. I mean, this is the thing.
That's the most obvious thing, isn't
Uniquely incompetent in these two areas.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. If they wanted to commit a genocide, then why aren't they? You know, even the most obvious, it's just the most obvious thing, isn't it? And it's very tragic that thousands of people have been killed in this war. But a genocide is something completely different. If Israel wanted to commit a genocide, it would have done it on October 8th. There would be no Palestinians left in Gaza because it has the military capability to do that. But still, these lies, they're pushed. And the interesting thing is that they're pushed via Hamas to the UN and then repeated on the BBC and all these channels, and then it becomes it's repeated and repeated and repeated, and people say, oh, but the UN said it,
and the BBC said it, but again, even like words like just genocide, the British government formally, you know, put out an official document. They'd assessed whether there was genocide. They decided there was not genocide because there isn't. There clearly isn't, and every single fact would tell you there isn't genocide being committed by Israel in Gaza. But you can't get a cabinet minister to say that, because they know they've got a vote here. I mean, it's a numbers game. I wrote this in The Sun last week. It's a numbers game. 4 million Muslims in this country, large number of whom feel very strongly about the Gaza issue. We saw that with the election last year, 5 Gaza MPs, you know, and then you've got, what, 300,000 plus Jews in this country, or less than that. There you go. There's your numbers. It's as simple as that. This is a numbers game as opposed to being on the side of right or wrong. But when can I come back to just universities? Because I am so horrified by what's happening at universities. And I say, I know 18-year-olds, Jewish girls, who have basically been talked out of going to certain universities because they know they won't feel safe there, even though it's, of course, they want to study at a good university. But they cannot be guaranteed, particularly London campuses, they cannot be guaranteed to be safe. The intimidation is so strong. That is so beyond unacceptable to me in this country, in this day and age. What can universities do about it? Or are the university authorities part of the problem?
They're massively part of the problem. I've been speaking to a group of academics, in particular in Edinburgh, who are absolutely despairing that even just on university property, there are signs calling for revolution, intifada, and they've tried to take it down, and the university authorities completely deny it.
Yeah, and intifada means the mass killing of Jews. That's what it means.
Exactly. So there are some universities that are handling it better, and I have to say, so Leeds, where my son is, and where I went, they were pretty awful for about 18 months that students took over entire buildings. Yesterday, what happened was, although you had students outside the building, they were kettled by the police and weren't allowed to kind of cause terror amongst the many students. But you're absolutely right that there have always been universities that Jews will tend to go towards because they're regarded as safer. Even when I was at university, this was the case.
But that's
the Jewish Society. And this is kind of what I'm saying, that this is although we're seeing like the height of the problem now, what we're seeing is 30, 40 years of work that has been going on. So when I was at university, and you probably, Julia, there were people that were starting this, that were going on about Israel being an apartheid.
No, genuinely, never saw any of it. Never saw. I mean, I'm probably older than you, to be fair. This has happened since then. Can we start with Tory Party conference?
Yeah.
Kemi Badenoch, about to give her keynote speech. These speeches are always later than they say they are, even when it doesn't involve Kemi Badenoch, who does have an issue with timekeeping. Trust me on this.
I was backstage yesterday, and they were running 10 to 15 minutes behind, and the poor people that make Conservative Party conference work were tearing their hairs out even then. I suspect it will be worse today.
Yeah, but also there'll be a lot of people who were leaving after the speech, and people are literally sitting there going, I need to get my train, I need to get my train. We're not going to take the speech live. We'll give you anything specific that she has to say. And we know that she's going to be talking a lot about this sort of golden rule, about fixing the black hole. And she's going to be sort of, saying, look, we have all these, we can try and make all these cuts, and then some of it's going to go to paying off debt, and some of it's going to be going to tax cuts to sort out the economy. But that's 4 years away if there's another election, realistically, in 2029. Realistically, does anyone think she's still going to be leader at that time? Because we've got the May local elections in which the Tories and Labour are likely to be trounced, but also, crucially, we've got even shadow cabinet members who are wheeling and dealing behind the scenes. I think only 35 Tory MPs would have to send...
Yeah, and they've doubled the threshold to make it easier for her to survive.
Yeah, because there's so few Tory MPs.
That's right.
Look, your man who you campaigned for, Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, you campaigned for his leadership last year. I mean, let's be honest, he's on manoeuvres.
Well, I don't accept that, actually. And
was anyone convinced by that?
Well, look, people were saying that he's going to go into conference and do an Andy Burnham-type routine, and he hasn't. He gave his speech. He's actually given, frankly, what's quite a modest set of fringe events, mostly seeming to be around a number of quite actually funny jokes that he's made, and that seems to be the bit that we got picked up. Some of them, I have to say, we couldn't broadcast in daytime radio because they had some fruity language, shall we say, about Palestinian protesters and the people who make up this cabinet.
I can't even tell you how much I've had to edit myself over the last week. I can't even tell you.
Yes, quite. He hasn't edited himself, and that's been his focus. However, look, the situation for Kemi Badenoch is everybody, including her, accepts is not where they would have wished it to be. When she came into office, there were 5 points clear of reform. There's a poll just out in the last few minutes by More in Common. It's the most favourable pollster consistently to the Tories, and it puts the lead at 14 points. That's up 4 points on last week that reform has over Kemi Badenoch. The effect so far of the Conservative Party conference, it has to be said, is that the poll ratings have gone down and not up.
I mean, that is the thing, yeah.
She's got a big speech to come. The Tory party have always felt most comfortable competing on economic grounds. Now, Liz Truss has damaged that reputation, but by and large, I think people in this country still believe that if you've got a choice of who's going to run the economy, Labour or Conservative, they believe that Conservatives will run it better, certainly than Rachel from accounts or customer relations. Or
I mean, literally anyone could. I did economics A level. I reckon I could run the economy better.
Well, quite. So this is a big moment. There's a lot riding on this speech, and the reaction in not just in the media, but in the polls over the next few weeks is going to be very consequential for Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we had lots of talk, will there be a pact or not? I think that would damage both the Tories and Reform. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is in India, is on a 2-day sort of big trade. Now, here's the thing. In my day, when I was a political journalist full-time, there was a convention that basically the other parties, whether you're in government or not, basically zipped it.
Yeah, but that doesn't apply to minor parties.
Yeah, exactly. But they would stay stum during other parties. It's a matter of courtesy to other parties. But that doesn't seem to be. I mean, the gloves are absolutely off, aren't they?
Yeah, look, and one of the disadvantages that Kemi Badenoch has got is the entire lobby have flown out now to go see what Keir Starmer's doing in India. And if he goes and makes news in India, boom, that's off the 6 o'clock news, that's off the 10 o'clock news. People just aren't even going to see what she's got to say.
Well, again, there's an element, isn't there? I know that we took, on the station took, Keir Starmer's speech live and Nigel Farage's, but not Kemi Badenoch. I mean, partly it depends on the time of day, but also genuinely, I mean, with all due, I really like Kemi as a person. I think she genuinely has a lot of useful stuff to say, and she's been very brave on some issues, not so brave on other issues, ahead of the curve of a lot of politicians. But does it really matter what Kemi Badenoch says in her Tory party conference speech today? Not really, no.
Kemi Badenoch's biggest problem over the last year is that too few of the public know who she is, too few of the public know what she stands for, and too few of the public are yet ready to forgive the Conservative Party for their record in government.
Too soon.
Unless something is going to change, the Conservative Party is just going to fade out.
Benedict Spence, Conservative commentator, and back, one night only.
Yes, it's a reunion tour.
The reunion
That's
tour.
What it is.
Benedict Spence back in the room. It's fabulous to have you here.
Thank you.
Great to have you on actually on a day when I know you know your stuff when it comes to issues like the international affairs. How hopeful are you that this peace plan agreed between Hamas and the Israelis in Egypt at these peace talks in Sharm el-Sheikh? Apparently, a ceasefire deal is going to be agreed and largely already in place, we understand. It's only like basically the phase one of a 20-point plan, and to a certain extent it's the easiest part of the plan. It's right, you give us your hostages. There was some talk that actually Hamas didn't have control over some of these hostages, certainly some of the access to some of the remains of some of those who 28 believed to be dead, but every single one has to be returned, whether alive or dead, in return for these prisoners. But that is kind of the easiest bit to agree to. What happens next, the day after, much harder. What are your hopes?
Well, it is easy in a sense, but it is also Hamas giving up its most important leverage, which I think that's the bit that sort of sticks out for me. I'd actually say I was maybe 66% in favour of this working out relatively well, because I just don't think that they'd be prepared to go that far if Hamas as a unified entity was planning on sort of pulling the rug out from under their feet. Now, obviously, until those hostages are all out, let's all just keep our fingers crossed and try not to get ahead of ourselves too much. But that in itself is a good sign. If it was some of the hostages that they were offering, well, then you're going, we know what's going on here.
That's always what's been on the table before. Couple here, couple there, in return for a few hundred murdering terrorists.
To give it the impression that they're prepared to talk. But actually, if they are prepared to do all of that, well, then all of a sudden you're going, all right, well, that is tangible progress, because what leverage do they have after that? Nothing.
But
really.
Here's the thing, if that was their leverage and they're giving it away, so they haven't suddenly decided, you know what, really happy to have Israel as part of the two-state solution. Of course not. They still want to kill every single Jew, every single Israeli, and by the way, us in the West too. Wake up, everybody. That's not changed. They're not going to give up their weapons. They're not going to walk away and go, well, we had a good go, never mind, off we go. That's not changed. So what has changed?
Well, I suspect that a lot of them will have been offered the chance to leave, to flee. Maybe they'll be able to keep a lot of... maybe they'll be allowed to keep a lot of the money that they've siphoned off
and it is in the billions.
They've done very well out of this. The ones that have survived have actually done very well. Let's be clear. A lot of them have died. And that's another part of it. The Israelis have been really very good, actually, at taking out their enemies as and when they've popped up throughout this conflict, be it in Gaza, be it in Lebanon, be it anywhere you name, they're pretty good at it. And so one does wonder, has it simply got to the point where the losses are too large, where enough of them are going, okay, we are not going to achieve our aims here. Maybe in 20, 30 years we'll have the chance to start something else. Because they play a long game. They do, much like the Israelis. We'll have the chance of something else. But what we're currently facing here is annihilation. There's nobody coming to look out, to rescue us. What's the actual end goal?
Iran hasn't come. Hezbollah's been destroyed.
Exactly. The efforts to drag
Qatar are now going, it's getting a bit difficult.
The efforts to sort of drag everybody into this sort of regional war. Okay, yes, Iran, big player, but Iran did not, in fact, want it, turned out, to be dragged into that. It had to save face. But actually, the Israelis gave it a real bloody nose as part of that. So what is the out? Well, this is the out. You're offered the opportunity to leave. Maybe, I don't know, you're allowed to take a lot of your influence with you. But for the main part, the actual war in Gaza will be done. But the greater struggle for freedom or whatever it is that they want, annihilation of the state of Israel, that can continue from elsewhere. They've been able to do that from elsewhere. Lots of groups have been able to regroup elsewhere, rebrand, all that sort of thing. So maybe that is their attitude.
Or they go underground and they play along with the idea that Hamas isn't in control of the Gaza Strip. Yeah. And you have your peace board that supposedly, Tony Blair and Donald Trump and others, and you have another organisation and that goes on. But actually, and Andrew Fox has written, we have on the show regularly, an interesting Substack on this, actually you have this thing where, carrying on underneath, you've got the people with the weapons, the people with the ruthlessness to say, the money goes here, the money goes there, you don't get a contract, you get a contract. Yeah. And actually, you kind of got a sort of a terrorist mafia under the just under the radar.
There will be an element of that, certainly, but the thing to remember is that Gaza is made up of lots of different factions, not just Hamas. So there was always that going on anyway, and not all of them like each other particularly. The question is going to be who comes in to police Gaza afterwards. Now, let's say it's not going to be the United States. That's not actually what it's going to be, and it's not going to be Israel. So who is it likely to be? It's probably going to be people from the Gulf states. Can you name me a particularly benevolent Gulf state, one that's famous for being really tolerant of insurgents? Yeah.
Because the reason why we support the Saudi regime, as disgusting and horrible as it is because they keep down
their attitude towards
the jihadist lunatics.
Pretty much every single one. Their attitude towards insurgencies and threats to their authority is ruthless. Not unlike, in fact, Israel once October the 7th happened. This is just how the Middle East works. That is probably who's going to end up doing it. It's not going to be any one state. It'll probably be a coalition. But I can't imagine them saying, because these will also be the countries that are funding the rebuild, I can't imagine them saying, yes, we're happy to pour tens of billions into rebuilding this place, and we're going to staff it for security reasons, and we'll be more than happy to look the other way as Hamas siphon this off.
Not going to happen.
It will be simply replacing one military with an actual occupation. They've been saying for however long, Israel occupies Gaza. It doesn't. But now they will be occupied by somebody else, and they'll call it a peace coalition or whatever. That's probably what's going to happen.
Well, we shall wait and see. Well, one of the reasons they've wised up is people like Silke Carlo, who's my next guest. She's director of Big Brother Watch, and who've been talking about this issue for a very long time. Good afternoon to you, Silke.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, there are so many arguments against ID cards and so few good arguments for them. It is amazing to me that government after government come up with this. We know Tony Blair is obsessed with ID cards, tried to bring them in way back when. Now, that was at a time when it was kind of like, just had an ID card, then it's some sort of digital aspect. Now that we've all got these mobile phones in our pockets, not all of us, but most of us, smartphones, they're talking about, it's not a card, is it? It is literally something that an app on your phone that will not just be a record of, your name, your address, I don't know, your right to work in this country as it's being played about illegal migrants being stopped. But it's going to have real-time information about you, updated all the time. And that's where the really, really sinister aspects come in, doesn't it?
Well, the pretext that this has been sold on is a lie. It's been sold as this is something that will be mandatory for the right to work because that will curb illegal immigration. Everyone who's looked at this has said this will do absolutely nothing to curb illegal working, by people who've come into the country and undocumented.
Who already have to host checks. I mean, an employer who doesn't bother asking for their passport or visa or their national insurance number is not going to be going, but I do need to see your digital ID.
Exactly. So the pretext that this mandatory digital ID has been sold to the public on is a lie. And so people rightly are distrustful and asking, what will it really be used for? At the moment, what we know is that it will have basic information and your biometric information. So that's information as sensitive as what's on your passport, your facial biometric. This is happening, by the way, at the same time that this government is having a big push on live facial recognition cameras all over our high streets. And so I think it's right that people then consider the ways in which this will become a sprawling surveillance system. Because at the same time as Starmer has said, this is only for the right to work, which is illogical, doesn't make any sense, and clearly isn't anything to do with illegal working. Multiple ministers have come out and said, actually, it would be really good for pensions, it'd be really good for benefits, it'd be really good for tax collection, and a number of other things. They're even talking about looking at whether to roll this out to 13-year-olds.
Wow.
And in the government's own documentation, quite aside from the press release, and I've got the government's explainer sheets, I've got the letter they sent around to parliamentarians. They're talking about private sector uses, about using digital ID to open private banks, about using it to prove your age in different scenarios, about the right to rent, basically your right to live.
To take part at all in society. But they said, no, it's just about our safety. I mean, we've heard that before, haven't we, during COVID? But that's interesting, as the Prime Minister on this trip to India, after announcing these plans late last month, and saying, no, it's just about immigration. And he's now talking about how it can be used for tax collection, claiming benefits, booking childcare, even applying for your child's school. And there will be people, even people who've been far too sensible to believe this would be a good idea, who are listening to this right now going, oh, it would be useful, wouldn't it, not to have to provide lots of different bits of ID, and I could just provide this one thing and it's on my phone and I've got it with me all the time. Well, I mean, I've got a passport, I've got a driving licence, I've got credit cards, I've got I hand over all my information to X and to Facebook and TikTok every day anyway. What difference does this make? Why are you making such a big deal out of it, Silky?
Well, if it's useful and people want it, there's no need to make it mandatory, is there? And so this could be something that the government offers to people that you can volunteer into. But the risk is that it's mandatory. You have no choice. And already this is a system that is being paired with incredibly significant punishments. If you don't have Starmer's digital ID card, even though you've got a British passport, you were born here, a birth certificate and everything else, you won't be able to work. The next thing will be, by their own indications, what they're talking about in the small print, is the right to rent. So you basically won't be able to live in your own country unless you have a digital ID. So I think it's important. And actually the word that Starmer has used on this India trip is calling it a passport, as in a passport in everyday life. So what I would say to people is this isn't just about identifying yourself. I get that it's useful for us all to have something easy to identify yourself when you really need to. It's about creating a kind of permission-based society where we live on license to the state and we have to comply with probably growing and sprawling rules, enabled to do ordinary things that we need to do to live our lives. That is a completely different society to the one in which we live, and it's not a very free one.
Indeed, and we were talking with Baroness Claire Fox about this, and she's been a big sort of freedom campaigner over the years, as indeed were you, lockdown as well, is that it does turn on its head our relationship with the state, doesn't it, in terms of who, we are individuals, we're born free, we are free unless there is a law made by our democratically elected parliament that limits that particular freedom because of an impact on other people. You can't steal, you can't kill. You can do anything in this country that there isn't an explicit law against. That is the theory. And it turns it on its head. Basically means you can only do things that the government allows you to do.
Yes, exactly. You can only do things that the government allows you to do, proven by this digital permit connected to your facial biometrics. Basically your face becomes a barcode, and then permissions are issued on this digital identifier. The other thing that's quite chilling is that Starmer has looked at India's sprawling digital ID system and said it's a massive success. He's clearly ill-informed about this. There are people in India who have actually died from starvation as a result of the Aadhaar digital ID scheme over there. There are reams of evidence and documentation about this by academics. I mean, it's just so ill-informed. And I think, this is something that often comes with human rights abuses and risks.
But again, you got people say nothing to hide, nothing to fear. But my God, we've seen, you know, even if you're a law-abiding citizen, you know, when we saw what happened in lockdown, we saw with COVID, the extraordinary overreach by government, supposedly for our safety. My worry is how many people would go, yeah, anything for safety. But of course, this all assumes they can do this. Governments of every hue, their record on major IT projects, not just the huge cost. I mean, they're saying a few billion. We are talking about absurd amounts of money for this. Their record on getting these things actually working, keeping them working, their record on hacking. I mean, none of this suggests this is actually going to happen in the next few years.
Yeah, well, Blair's ID scheme, you know, £5 billion of public money was wasted on that, and it never got off the ground. Well, I, like you, I'm incredibly emboldened by the spirit of British people who've looked at this and said, we don't buy the lie, we don't trust the government. We saw what happened with COVID IDs. You know, how quickly will this become something where, oh, you could go to school, but now because you haven't had the third jab, you can't. You know, like we're well aware of the risks, and I think likewise, this will never get off the ground. A huge portion of the public will never do this. Even Boris Johnson has said.
Even Boris Johnson. I certainly won't carry one. I always said I'll carry a passport. I'll get a vaccine if it's required by another country, because that's my choice. I will not prove anything to anybody in this country, because this is my country. The thing is, we can think it's unlikely it'll ever happen, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop being vigilant and preventing it from happening. That's the key.
We mustn't be complacent. No to number 2, digitalid.co.uk is where our campaign is. We have to fight this tooth and nail, because if it does get off the ground, this is the problem. If it does get off the ground, this is the kind of thing that's irreversible, and it will change the foundation of our society forever. So now is the time to put up the fight.
100%. Let's talk to Fleur Hassan Nahum. She's the Israeli Foreign Ministry's Special Envoy. She's former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem and joins us now live from Israel. Very good morning to you, Fleur.
Hi, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. I have to say, I was really pleased to be able to meet you on my recent trip to Israel. You spoke to the good people I was travelling with. I could not have believed then that we would be discussing today the prospect that within the next 72 hours, every single one of those families that I met, Hostage Square, and have interviewed over the last couple of years, could possibly be getting their loved ones home. Just tell us your reaction when you saw that this deal was, well, agreed.
Absolutely. So we knew that something was happening when Witkoff and Kushner show up in Egypt and the rest of the government representatives for Israel. And we're just thrilled but cautiously optimistic, because ultimately we don't know what's going to happen in the next 48 hours. But at the moment, it looks like these hostages are coming home. There's been an incredible amount of pressure put on Qatar and on Turkey, who are essentially the only people still supporting Hamas. And I think that pressure has worked. But again, Julia, you don't know with these people until the very last minute. Until I see those hostages in that Red Cross van, I'm not going to believe it.
I know, and that's the thing, is that a lot of people are going to feel that way. But see, you see pressure on Qatar and Turkey. There's some reports that, British media, which we know, we've talked many times about the bias in British media on this issue, which seems to argue that, well, Donald Trump had to get involved because Qatar, his big ally, who gave him his big jet, they were angry after the misstep by Netanyahu in those attacks on the Hamas leadership in Qatar. But I would see it the opposite way round, that the Qataris finally realised, this is no longer in our interest to be supporting Hamas, and they put pressure on Hamas because Israel put pressure on them.
Absolutely right, Julia. Ultimately, Qatar have been funding terrorism for years. They fund the poison machine, which is called Al Jazeera. They fund universities to teach hatred. And so ultimately, the chickens came home to roost. For the first time ever, Qatar had a direct consequence of them supporting and being the spokespeople for the Muslim Brotherhood. Let's not forget, the Saudis can't stand Qatar for that reason, because it puts their kingdom at risk. The Emiratis, the same thing. They've kicked Al Jazeera out of their countries, and yet the West just lets them in. And so I think I completely agree with your analysis. When Qatar saw that they all of a sudden were in the firing line, that definitely gave them an incentive, and the Americans helped out, because Trump is very, very smart. He shows Qatar that now supporting Hamas is a liability.
Yeah, and And that's where
it
was always going to come down to that, wasn't it? It was in the interest of Hamas to keep the hostages and for their paymasters to support that, and they would carry on. And now it appears it's not. Here's the thing, though. There'll be many people who will argue, people who've been critical of Israel's response to the attack on October the 7th, that they believe it's unjustified. They make false claims about genocide. They're provably untrue, categorically untrue, these claims, and that it's a uniquely brutal war and the like. The reality is, though, once Israel no longer has any hostages, lots of those same people will claim Israel has no justification to continue any war effort or any military presence in Gaza. What would you say to that?
Well, that's why there's a 21-point plan that Trump and his people presented and very cleverly got the rest of the Arab world to sign off on it, the Europeans to sign off on it. All these people, all these cheering squad for the two-state solution, they've all signed off on this 21-point plan. And the 21-point plan...
I thought it was 20 now.
Oh, sorry, 20. Well, 21-point plan. But the point is that it gives Israel a perimeter of security between Hamas, between Gaza and Israel, something we never had before. So in some of the map that actually Trump put out on his social media about a week ago, it's very clear that that perimeter for us gives us the safety that we need. Look, in an ideal world, Julia, we wouldn't be negotiating with terrorists, but we don't live in an ideal world. This is the cruel, brutal enemy that took our people on October 7th, and we need to get them back. And so, of course, we've had to make compromises. We're having to release 250 murderers from the jails in order to get these hostages. This is not a plan which is good for anyone, but at least it gets them home. I pray it gets them home.
A lot of people have claimed that it is Netanyahu, that your Prime Minister's stubbornness and his urge to stay in power, keeping two particular right-wingers I'd say extremists in his government, that has prevented this sort of deal happening before now. What do you say to that criticism?
This deal was never on the table, Julia, never on the table. They wanted to drip drab the hostages 2 at a time, 3 at a time. We saw what happened in January. 2 one day, 3 one day. We don't know whether they're dead. We don't know whether they're alive. That was the psychological warfare they were doing to us. And Trump came and said, or all or nothing. And if you don't release all the hostages in phase 1, Israel can do whatever they want with America's backing. That type of gun on the table, which is very, very typical of Trump, is what works in the Middle East. You know, this is what works here. You're dealing with people who would take us back to the 7th century if they could with their brutality. What are they going to understand?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. The trouble is, people say this peace plan's been agreed and Donald Trump bigs it up and he's doing all the big, I don't believe for a moment that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, walking in with a note that they knew would be able to be seen by the cameras, wasn't part of theatrics of this. And he makes the announcement he's going to fly to the Middle East. He wants to be there for it. I don't care. Give the guy 14,000 Nobel Peace Prizes. As a guest of mine said yesterday, give him the prize for physics and astronomy. You give him the prize for everything. But this he's done more than most people who've got a lot of those prizes. But here's the thing. The peace plan hasn't been agreed to by Hamas. It's been agreed to by the Arab states, by America, by European nations, and by Israel. But Hamas have said yes, but they've said yes to this phase. This is just phase 1. After that, there is no agreement. And the trouble is that actually the after that bit is rather more complicated.
It is rather more complicated, but that's why there's a 20-point plan with milestones. And so you want this, you have to commit to that. You want that, you have to commit to that. The biggest sticking point is the disarmament, because it's a terrorist group. Their raison d'etre is arms. And that is the biggest sticking point. Are Hamas going to remain governing Gaza? And I hope they don't, mainly for the Palestinian people living in Gaza. They deserve a better leadership than murderous jihadists, people who actually want to give them a future, want to develop an economy. They had that opportunity in 2005, and they elected this terrible government, and this government, of course, never had an election again, and they've taken the people to ruin. And so I hope that this is not just peace for us and quiet for us, but the opportunity for Gazans to have a better future.
Well, we shall see what happens.